Ah, thank you for whoever did that. Probably Angela. Thank you. But again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening, at least here on the West Coast, uh, for this event. Hashtag Pinay, dominant representations of Filipinas, how they impact us and how we challenge them. This is going to be a dialogue, so we're hoping that everybody or most of you in the room can participate. I am Dr. Robyn Rodriguez. I will be joined by Celine Corpus, who I will introduce in a moment. But again, thank you so much for being here for this event on this most important, one of the most important days, I think, for many of us of the year. So for me, just quick introduction. I am activist scholar, author, community organizer. I like to think of myself as the people's professor at the Department of Asian American Studies, which I am now a professor emeritus of. I became a full professor. I was the first Pinay to serve as chair. I was also the founder of the Bulusan Center for the Filipinx Studies. For those of you who still aren't in the updated yet, I have retired. That's why I am Professor Emeritus of Asian American Studies at UC Davis. I am no longer a university professor, hence the idea of me being a people's professor. We have migrated the bulk of the programs that were in the Bolosan Center at UC Davis, and now it is at home in the community as Amado Khaya, as the Amado Khaya Initiative. So as part of a nonprofit project that is connected also to the Asian American Liberation Network, which of course is named after my late son. I continue to devote myself to sharing ethnic studies research and scholarship and knowledge through the School for Liberating Education, and certainly here through this platform. We are going to also be joined by Celine Corpus, whose pronouns are they, them. Sally is a local Sacramento organizer for Gabriela Sacramento and the external chairperson for Northern California Filipinx American Student Alliance. They have roots in the heart of the Central Valley from Delano to Stockton, where they were raised all their life. Sally also was a Bulusan intern, was one of my students. I'm so excited that Sally is able to join us today to lead in some of the conversation later. Sally is determined in educating about the rich history of the Philippines to understand the current conditions working class Filipinos face abroad. Although the Philippines is separated from us by the seas, it was through community organizing that made me feel closer to the motherland and our people. And that's a quote from Sally. And we're going to be able to be in conversation with Sally in a little bit. I also want to just talk about our work. So the Amado Khaya Initiative is this event tonight is co-sponsored by the Laban Group, of which the Amado Khaya Initiative is part. The Laban Group is a collaborative of ethnic media producers, specifically Filipino ethnic media producers. That includes Amado Khaya. It also includes the Philippine Fiesta newspaper, artists, and other media makers. And we've all been formed as a collaborative, really to respond to anti-Asian violence. The Laban Group was able to secure some state funding to do the work of really countering the various kinds of representations that are out there and that proliferate about Asians, and certainly even Asian Americans and Filipinos and Filipino Americans, that ultimately have an impact on our lives. We know that some of the kinds of representations that were out there, certainly at the height of the pandemic, the idea that the term the China virus that was being stated by Donald Trump, for example, other kinds of anti-Asian sentiment that was being propagated by that particular administration and also taken up by other people just in the broader community that really fed into anti-Asian violence. This is our work as part of countering these kinds of representations, putting forward our stories from our perspectives. And so this talk tonight is co-sponsored by the Laban Group and as part of this broader initiative that we're part of as Amado Khaya. Very specifically, actually, we are joined by fellows from our Amplify Fellowship. We launched the Amplify Fellowship late last year into this year. As you can see, the Amplify Fellowship, which is Activating Media Positively, Leadership Institute for Filipino Youth, is a fellowship program that's part of the Amado Khaya Initiative. And it's part of our work. We have a major programmatic focus in championing alternative media and ethnic voices. So the fellowship builds on the lessons from the Laban Group's work by providing training for aspiring journalists and media makers by incentivizing youth engagement and exposing youth to traditional media while also lifting up their emerging expertise as media makers. So we have this cohort of 6 young people who are interested in journalism and our media production for a 1-year program. They've been in training, and actually tonight's session is partly part of their training. One of the other trainers, a key kind of cornerstone actually for their training, Scott Suchitani, Dr. Scott Suchitani is also on board here, the coordinators for this program are Wayne Japanda, as well as Angela Alejandro. So they've been helping to organize these trainings. Scott has been really training them, especially in podcasting, which is sort of the specific kind of digital media that the Amplify Fellows will be producing at the end of their second 6 months. So we're very, very excited about what it will look like later on in the year when they finally finish their projects. But just to kind of give you some background, that part of this talk is partly part of their training as well. So we're also happy and excited that they're here tonight to be part of this conversation. So, one of the issues, again, I've spoken to Laban and why we have Laban. We know that anti-Asian hate is happening. It's happening specifically in our communities. It's happening in the greater Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley regions. When we were still working in the Bulusan Center, we're supporting the Laban Group in pulling out the data relevant to the Filipino community that was being compiled by Stop AAPI Hate. And we found some really interesting findings. And among the things we found is the ways that gender really matters when it comes to who exactly is experiencing anti-Asian hate. And so we found that of the respondents, of those who were reporting anti-Asian hate to the Stop AAPI Hate National, we found, and mind you, these are just people who happen to feel brave enough and empowered enough to actually file a report with Stop AAPI Hate. So we know that this is a severe undercount of the actual experiences of anti-Asian violence, but in terms of those who did take the time and who felt empowered to report, of the 128 of the different respondents that were from the region in the greater Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley, we found that 56%, so over half of those who responded were women, 33% were men, 2% were non-binary. So these are very, very interesting kinds of findings, just in terms of thinking about how do representations matter? How do they have a real impact on our lives? Representations of Asian women having real material impacts on our lives, right? In terms of whether we can be safe out in public. And of course, when it came to the place, where did these anti-Asian hate incidences take place? It was often in a business or a public place. So really, really interesting. That means that when we leave our homes, although arguably even at home, we can be experiencing various kinds of hate and even violence that are rooted in these different kinds of dominant representations of Asian women, or very specifically Filipina women. So I want to start with my story. Just give me a moment here. You could take a while and try to find me on the left and find, and obviously that's me on the right. So let's just give me a moment. I may have to stop share for a second because I'm not looking at my notes. So give me a sec. So enjoy that late 80s, 1980s photo of me for a moment before I turn it off and then put it on again. Okay, hold on just a moment. There it is again. I can't read the chat, but I'm guessing it's kind of blowing up because it's kind of funny. I'm yeah. Hold on. Okay, sorry. Here we go. I'm hoping that okay, please let me know if you see my notes. If you don't, if you see my notes, you're not meant to see my notes. You're meant to see my junior high school basketball team picture. Yes, I got picked. Yay, made the team. Was mostly on the bench, but this is me here. If you could see my arrows. This must be, I think, this looks like fourth or fifth grade me. Just looking at the teeth. Growing up in the 1980s, it was very rare to ever see girls or women who look like me on television or in the movies. I think probably growing up, the only time I really saw anyone that looked like me was with the rise of Cory Aquino, who was the grieving widow of the late Senator Benigno Aquino, a legislator who opposed the Marcos dictatorship and who was assassinated by the regime. Now, as much as Cory's story was very compelling, and maybe just take a pause a bit, I think something is off mute. I know that we're seeing each other a lot in person, so maybe we're forgetting Zoom etiquette. But please, if you can, please mute. It gets just a little bit distracting for me, and probably too for people who are listening in. But thank you. But going back, so growing up, we didn't have a lot of Filipinos out there, and if you saw somebody, the person I saw at least growing up was Cory Aquino. But she was inspiring, of course. She's compelling. Especially because the anti-martial law movement was really growing in the wake of the assassination of Benigno Aquino. And not only was there visibility now of this Filipina woman, but of Filipinos. And it was exciting because the dictatorship fell and then she was elected a president. And interesting, I think for me as a kid, I just wasn't necessarily, I don't know that she captured my imagination as a role model. I think for me as a young girl, the significance of seeing a Filipina rise to power and assume the office of president, and she was actually the first president, right, of my parents' ancestral homeland. And this is super significant, of course, because even in the adopted home in the United States, we've never elected a woman president. So you just take a pause and you think, the Philippines, third world country, elects a female president. You can't even get that happening in the so-called, kind of advanced, society, modern society of the United States. Growing up, I don't think that I really grasped the significance of that. But if there was something that did capture my imagination, if there were Filipinas who had the power to really captivate me, and women Pinays that I somehow took seriously, it was Miss Philippines. The Miss Universe pageant and the other international beauty pageants that Filipinas participated in, I mean, they completely captured our attentions, my attention as a young girl, and the attention of the diaspora. A beauty pageant women could captivate us in a way a woman leader didn't seem to. Now, as Professor Genevieve Clotario, a Filipino studies professor, states, and this is really, really powerful. She says, beauty is powerful and functions as a structuring force that determines individual and cultural practices. And she does a really great study of kind of beauty and how it functions in Philippine society. Completely recommend it. And, it's a really helpful text and a helpful study for thinking about, for us, helping us to think about beauty, what beauty does and its power. Beauty is visibility. Visibility is power. beauty holds a very particular kind of power that even the power of office, in the case of a Gloria Aquino, for instance, didn't seem to have, at least for me. And I would argue maybe even now, the Miss Universe pageant was about the only time when stunningly gorgeous young Filipino women, a majority of whom were along some spectrum of shade of brown, usually lighter than my own, would crowd the screen. I don't think I ever missed a screening of any major international beauty contest where there was a Miss Philippines. I always felt so much pride seeing Miss Philippines walk across that stage. I would tear up, just feeling so proud that a Filipina would take top spot amongst the world's, or the universe, I guess, Miss Universe, the universe's greatest beauties. There was a sense of pride that it brought for me that a Filipina could be seen and valued somehow. Now, after graduating from high school, and that's actually, you can see with the Filipino, but that's when I graduated from college, but even still, I looked pretty much the same through college, from high school to college. But after graduating from high school, I started to learn how the dominant images of Filipinas as beauty queens, images that not only circulated for us as a community to latch onto and be proud of, but that also circulated to global non-Filipino audiences, would negatively impact me. So it really didn't kind of occur to me, as a young girl, I was just excited to be someone seeing someone from the Philippines who was a Filipina, but I don't think I really fully grasped that it could have a negative impact on me until it did. Like, one of the things I really remember, right after I graduated from high school, I was working as a teller at a bank during my first year in college. And I remember one of the bank patrons coming up to me, a white guy, smiling in a way that I felt was very, very cringy. He asked me if I was Filipina. I said, yes. He said he had been to the Philippines. And, whenever even now, I guess, when people know the Philippines, somehow I feel all excited and hopeful. So I felt kind of like, oh, okay, he's been to the Philippines. And then he went on and he says to me that he was stationed in the Philippines and that he was ex-military. And then he said, yeah, I know all about Filipino women. And he gave me this really creepy, cringy smile. And also confusion, because at the time I was like, what does it actually mean? What does it mean when he says he knows all about Filipino women? At the time, just out of high school, I didn't really quite have the language yet to grasp it all. It wasn't until really my third year in college when I came to learn what explained my experience with that customer and other kinds of encounters I would have, especially with older white men. And what's interesting is I came to learn about what explained my experience from a beauty queen. Nelia Sancho, her story just caught my attention when I first encountered it in college. After having won the title of Queen of the Pacific in 1971, Nelly would stop participating in beauty pageants and instead turn her attention to fighting martial law in the Philippines, and ultimately going on to co-found Gabriela, an organization that advances rights for Filipino women. I mean, she was even forced into the underground. She became a political prisoner. It was just amazing. I had no idea that there was somebody like this. One thing that was so powerful and important about Nelia's story is that her decision to stop being a beauty queen was motivated by the fact that she too came to realize on some level, and this is where I learned, that beauty pageants were a form of propaganda by the Marcos regime. By hosting the big pageants and welcoming international guests, the Marcos administration could try to convince the world that he was a benevolent dictator and that martial law was bringing order and stability to the Philippines. The tourists that would attract people to the Philippines, Marcos hoped, would come with foreign currency, dollars, yen, marks, pounds to spend. But what did that mean for poor working class women? I just dropped something. Excuse me. I just lost my window again as we go into the juicy parts. Got excited. For those of you who were ever in a classroom with me, you know that my hands tend to go and I drop my mouse. Anyway, so what did this mean, right? For Filipino women. Again, just a quick pause. I think there's somebody who's not muted. Please watch that. Thank you. And this is again drawing from a Filipino studies scholar, Anne Laksamana, who writes Revolutionizing Feminism. Dr. Anne Laksamana writes, the commodification of Filipino women's sexuality turned out to be a profitable marketing strategy, with various indicators revealing a direct correlation between the growth of prostitution throughout Manila and other popular tourist areas in the country and the rise in international tourism. In other words, Marcos really actively marketing Filipinos through things like the Miss Universe pageant, right? Really actively kind of commodifying Filipina women's sexuality for the purpose of drawing in tourists. Part of what ends up happening is it creates the job opportunities that become created as part of this strategy become in the area of sex work, and you find that working class and poor women have other few choices apart from these kinds of jobs. Along with enticing tourists by commodifying women's bodies, Marcos also tried to entice continued military aid from its close ally, the United States, by promising that the U.S. bases in the Philippines, like Subic Bay, would offer so-called rest and recreation for U.S. troops stationed in the country and the broader region. Rest and recreation was a euphemism for state-sanctioned prostitution of Filipino women, with few other options between tourism or even kind of what's happening around the bases. For many Filipino working class and poor women, finding themselves with few choices but to work in the sex industry. Even after Marcos was deposed, Cory Aquino would actually continue to commodify Filipinas in her own way by promoting the labor of Filipinas as domestic workers. And that's something, of course, that I talk about in my first book, Migrants for Export. Now, Nelia Sancho, as part of Gabriela, was at the forefront of fighting to dismantle the Marcos regime and the ways that it actively commodified Filipino women, and continued in that fight when Cory Aquino, a woman herself, but who would still continue to advance policies not unlike her predecessor. I have to say, Nelia was very, very influential in my life, and I really think for the lives of Filipina really around the world. And I really, part of why I wanted to talk about her today is, she passed away last year. I think it was last year. And I just really didn't feel like I was able to honor the kind of role that she played in my life at the time that she passed. And I feel as if her influence and her power becomes so important. And I'll start to really dive into that, and especially kind of with respect to how things are today. But, one of the things about Nelia, and this is just a photo of me again in college, reading about or learning about Nelia, actually getting a chance to meet her and her sister really became this, just really changed my life entirely. I think, Nelia's influence really had to do with her beauty and the fact that she was really using this platform of being a former beauty queen and leveraging that made her especially powerful. I think what I loved about her, what drew me and so many Filipina women to her, is that she offered a very different way of being a Filipina beauty on the world stage, not just like the demure and ladylike, what's called or termed the Dalagang Pilipina, or like the Marie Clara, some of you might be familiar with, like the kinds of women who graced the Miss Universe stage. But she was fiercely outspoken, absolutely courageous, a Pinay who was willing to fight and even die for justice. When all of us as young Filipinas at the time, when we had very few representations of us in pop culture, or representations of us that were confined to small roles like beauty queens, she really emerged as a very different kind of role model for so many in my generation. And the work of Gabriela Filipinx would inspire us in the diaspora. And then I would end up working actually in college on in different organizations that become the precursors and kind of form the foundation for what eventually becomes Gabriela USA, which Sally will discuss later. Interestingly, as I was starting grad school, was when we as scholars would begin to use the internet more and more as part of our research process. And, this was actually very new because in previous generations, of course, even if there were computers, the internet wasn't publicly, available necessarily for researchers. You kind of had to go to card catalog or do other things that even I didn't have to do in grad school. I was kind of that generation that started to be able to have access to the internet as a platform for doing research. And so when I started grad school, I knew I wanted to study overseas Filipino workers, especially the phenomenon that that Filipino workers were increasingly, a majority of Filipino workers were increasingly women. Organizations like Gabriela Filipinx really alerted me to this dynamic. I knew I wanted to go to grad school so that I could do the kind of research that can help uplift issues that were of importance to social justice movements in the Philippines. So I remember I did an initial search and I'm typing Filipinas in the search bar. It was just like, wow, like just, sex site after sex site coming up on the search, in the search, or if not sex sites or really sexualized images, it was like sites promoting what are called mail order brides, or basically kind of like, dating platforms where typically white men are looking to date exclusively Filipino women. Or there was like sites where, you could secure like a Filipina domestic worker. Like that was pretty much the only thing that you could find if you were doing like a research on and typing in Filipina into the search bar. So I actually ended up really, troubled by this and trying and writing about it in a piece. And if you haven't seen it, it was actually in 2004 when we first wrote this piece, a chapter called Filipina.com in this book, AsianAmerica.net. I co-wrote it with Professor Bernadette Gonzalez. But, this was sort of what I was encountering as a grad student trying to do research actually on Filipinas. And what's interesting, right? And this is where it just blows my mind and why it's so relevant for today's conversation. I wrote this piece reflecting on something that was happening in 2004. Fast forward 20 years to 2024. Now, if at the time when I was doing this article with Dr. Gonzalez, and the reason why we were writing it at the time, and I think it's even true now, right? The internet, it was like this like phenomenon. We're like, wow, we have access to information. This thing, the internet was going to offer us all this possibility where we could kind of create alternative narratives, or we can tell stories from our perspective. That there was this idea that the internet was this incredibly democratizing process and structure or kind of platform. And so part of the reason why we were reacting to it was because if that was the case, if everybody is celebrating the internet as this democratizing phenomenon, right? Putting knowledge and information in everybody's hand and putting into people's hands the opportunity to write their stories and narratives. And yet when we enter Filipinas, all we get is sex, wives for sale, domestic workers for sale, then clearly there's something wrong with this platform. And I think what's really interesting and troubling is 20 years later, everybody's talking about the algorithm. And there are algorithms that sort of help to like tailor our our searches so that things that are relevant and of interest to us kind of will populate our feeds when we're kind of looking for them. And yet, right, the algorithms of the internet and you have to remember the internet was originated as a military technology, right? The internet was a technology for war, to do war better and more effectively. This tool, which, that was promising all this possibility of us being able to tell our stories, us being able to kind of access other kinds of information that might have been only available to the privileged few. What's clear is that it's still, even today, continuing to serve, at least for me, and this is why I want to hear from folks, like, do you feel the same way? The commodification for the Filipina women's bodies. And this is really just trips me out because these screenshots are on a search from my phone, right? If the algorithm like somehow is figuring it out, so interesting that we still see the same kind of content. How to win your Filipino visa, USA visa coach, free Asian dating, frustrated with local dating. It's not you, it's them. Filipinas are friendly and sick. I mean, it's just all of it. And so, it makes me just kind of think, especially, about all of it and what that means for us. As I said before, I think this is a really powerful argument made by Professor Clotario, something that I think is really true, that beauty is visibility and visibility is influence and power. That was the case for Nelia. It really is still the case today. Today, young Filipinas have plenty of representations of themselves in pop culture. We're on TV, yay. We're on the movies, yay. We're big pop stars, yay. And then even better, we can represent ourselves. We don't need to look for women who look like us. We can literally put our faces and lives out there for the world to see. And there's all sorts of things that feel affirming about that. And for me, I worry that the kinds of representations that are out there, whether it's others doing those representations of us, or even ourselves creating them, representations of Pinais are still limited. I worry that beauty makes for visibility and makes for influencers, but I worry that it ends there. The possibilities that Nelia's visibility opened up, the kinds of ways of being Filipina, Pinay that she offered to me as a young woman, sometimes seem few and far between in the world of beautiful influencers. And the proliferation of representations, it's great. We can see ourselves, and yet some of these representations can end up even harming us even more than ever before. Not only are these representations feeding into this culture, this cringy culture, that ultimately leads to the kind of misogynistic, anti-Asian violence that gets perpetrated against Filipina women, Asian women broadly, the kind of violence that created the need for this work we're doing in Laban to begin with. But, more than that, it also makes some of us feel less than. And that can also impact our mental health in ways that I feel like did not exist for me as a young woman. So as much as there were less representations when I was younger, I don't know that I felt with the experience, the kinds of the mental health impact that had for me. It somehow feels different and somehow not as acute and severe as the kind of negative mental health impact that almost the proliferation of representations of Pinay seems to be producing, I think. And again, I'd love to hear the conversation because I'm coming at it from my generation. That's also why I wanted to be in conversation with Sally to hear what it sounds like from their perspective and their generation for all of you who are in this space. So that's really the end of my presentation. I wanted to kind of talk story a little bit about my own process, of the process by which I became an organizer, the process by which women's issues came to take a center stage in my life. Also to share some of the great Filipino studies scholarship out there that helps us, give us tools to think about things. But for now, what I really want to do is talk, be in dialogue with all of you. If Sally, if you're feeling okay with be, you know, starting us off in the conversation. I was thinking that it would be kind of interesting to break up into breakout groups, into smaller spaces if people feel okay with that, to just answer these questions. What have been the impacts of dominant representations of Pinays or Filipinas for you? What do you feel about how Pinays represent themselves? How do you represent yourself? What are the ways we can resist the algorithm? And just kind of keeping it, keeping this discussion open. But maybe before we open it up for conversation, maybe if there are any questions right now, maybe that we can start with that. And then I'd really like to just give ourselves some time and space to have discussion. So I was really hoping to break us out into discussion groups. So any questions though, for now? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I'll let us sit for a little bit. Where can we read this book? Thank you, April. Not sure which book you're referring to because there's multiple books that I talked about. There is the book by Genevieve Clatario. There's the book by Anne Laksamana. I talked about the book that I was part of. But actually, I will talk about a place where you could get some additional resources. I started pulling together some additional resources for folks. Yeah. So Anne Laksamana, I think that, probably you can get it from a really good bookstore. I don't like to promote Amazon, but, probably there too. But the press, I think the press is Routledge Press, and I'll put that in the chat. Routledge Press. So that's a press, so you should be able to get it directly from the publisher, I believe. And yes, I'll include those questions in the chat so we could all talk about them. Just give me a moment to get there. But in the meantime, for folks who are still kind of thinking, I don't want to put you on the spot, Sally. But are you ready to hop on, Sally? Do you have any kind of thoughts maybe about some of this, or even questions for me as my co-conspirator for tonight? Hi, Sally.
Hi, everyone. I guess I can get these discussion questions started. I think what brings me to this question about what have been the impacts of dominant representations for you. I think something that makes me think, at least like growing up, it always starts from the home for me. Especially for my mom. She's a migrant Filipina, came from the Philippines, migrated here, and knowing that she had her own representations growing up in the Philippines, how there's like a certain way and lifestyle that many Filipina migrants come from, and how it's really that generational shift, carrying it on from my mom's generation to my generation, and how that was my idea of like Penay representation was just through my mom, my titas, my lolas, and it kind of led me to like really question myself, like growing up, especially. I have working class origins. I grew up in Stockton, where it was a working class community, where it's really like that difference, really that a class difference that I saw in myself and how I represent myself as a Pinay. I think I've always wanted to grow more in like how I see myself, especially when it comes to media. I grew up looking at the usual skin whitening or like that body shaming type of thing. I'm pretty sure if you go to any party, your tita or your family members asking you about your weight even. It's those types of beauty standards that I especially was surrounded by, especially. But I think especially growing older and raising more of my critical consciousness, more how it even represents me like politically, like where these ideas come from. It really led me to just understanding myself a lot more. It was really through history and community organizing that led me to understand like where these beliefs came from my mom's generation, and how these are types of narratives that even for me I'm constantly battling with, to especially to teach other future generations of Pinais out there. And I guess I'll answer just this one more question. Like, how do I represent myself? Honestly, I would say I'm just a devoted community organizer. That's how I devote myself to this type of work, especially because there's so many. Oftentimes, I grew up, especially as I'm the only daughter. I'm the bunso. I'm the youngest. Where I'm constantly being told not to speak up for myself, not to do certain ways of what a Filipina should do. There's a certain narrative that I grew up in. But really, for me, community organizing led me to speak more about myself, but also my own community, and really rise up whenever we see our community experiencing types of different systematic oppression. So I think what really helped me see myself more was really that education and that political consciousness
Yeah.
coming to terms now.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Sally. What really strikes me about your experience is like we are generations apart and probably your mom's generation, And like one that basically you were feeling through your mom, who is literally my generation, right? The reproduction of certain kinds of ideas, right? Around ideal, a Filipina femininity, it sounds like. And what's also interesting to me, especially because you're like a Gen Zer, you didn't get a new framework of how to be and think about being Filipina through being on social media. Or you're not, to me, you're not saying something like, oh, because I saw so and so, this actress, or so and so, this athlete, or, I follow this influencer. It was still through organizing, kind of like me too, where you discover kind of, or you do this political education. I mean, partly maybe a little bit from college, but more so from organizing, where you're learning to unpack these ideas, and learning to also do the work to dismantle the structures, right, that are perpetuating the kinds of the structures that perpetuate these representations. So yeah, and thank you, echoing what was put in the chat. Thank you for sharing your vulnerability, Sally. It's definitely hard, I mean, I hear you when you're saying like it's a constant struggle. It is so much, right? The body weight and the body shaming, it sucks. I feel like I'm getting older now, I'm in my 50s. It's like, dang, I had to deal with being too brown. Now, then I got to deal with being too fat. And now I have to deal with being too fucking old, And it's like, I mean, like it's been really like disturbing. What's really it's like, whoa, women in my generation who are talking really casually about like Botox, lip fillers, like all this stuff. I'm even seeing it in younger women, much younger than me. And I'm like, whoa, wow, like this is what's going on. Right. And then almost feeling like, and again, I'd love to hear how other people feel about it, but I almost wonder if like this hyper proliferation of different kinds of images is just making it worse. It's like, okay, you have it at home, have it in your family, and then, now you have the internet and like just all of this constant imagery. Like you can't even do hashtag Pinay. And like, what are you seeing? Light skin Pinays, hypersexualized images, and like, even though like I want to be really body positive and sex positive, Like, how do we balance between, being body positive, sex positive, and not also, you know, somehow, participating in uh the amplification and reproduction of certain kinds of images. So yeah. But again, thank you, Sally. I'm seeing that the chat is lighting up. Thank you. See, Sally, it took you to open up everybody. Right? This comment that every Pinay gets body shamed, right? Plastic surgery is so normalized in our community. It just makes me feel crappy. Yes, right. Always has bothered me. And the beauty pageants too, even if my cousins at this were beauty queens and I just hated it. Yes. I believe the medical industrial complex in the Philippines connection to the medical field also drive this. Oh, Jamie, okay, April, I live in Montana and thankful that people don't really wear a ton of makeup or do plastic surgery here. Yeah, sometimes it's context, right? On the other hand, people look really dirty. That's the norm. That's hella funny. I live in the country, April. I live in California, but in a rural context. So I hear you. Oh, that's funny. Another comment again, back to Erin, about a friend getting a boob job. A former friend obsessed with plastic surgery on her face, just didn't understand colonial mentality and so much self-hate. Yeah. Yeah. White standards of beauty. I wish I didn't just search my explore page for hashtag Pinay. Yeah, cat, right? It's like, whoa. Yeah. This has been great. Oh, thank you, Danny. It's always good to see you. Oh, I hope that I don't know if Danny hopped off already, but it's nice to have Danny in this space. But if folks please fill up the chat if you like. But actually, if folks are okay, I'd really love to break us into breakout groups, and really have space for folks to have more conversation with one another. And I want to give folks at least we still have plenty of time actually, so we could be really chill. At least some time to have discussion amongst yourselves and share. And then we can kind of come back to the main room for folks who are feeling a little bit more emboldened to speak out and maybe willing to share what was shared in the smaller space. That would be great. And then I actually wanted to share this song. It's funny. We started with Ruby Ibarra's Us, which I think has been a pretty powerful anthem maybe for Gen Z, all of us really, in more recent years in terms of sort of an anthem of like strong Pinay, just like a Kim Mortal. I saw somebody kind of give love to Kim Mortal, also a really great artist, right? Who really also does a lot in terms of like lifting up very different ways of thinking and being Pinay. I wanted to actually share like an old ass song that was like probably my anthem when I was like in college, and I was like I'm still learning a little bit later. But yeah, I'm gonna break us out into little groups. I'm thinking of let's see, there are now 36 of us. I don't know. Ooh, and people are hopping off. They're like, okay, I'm out now. Bye. But maybe I'll create 5 breakout groups if that feels okay. Thank you. Thanks, Libs. Thank you. And then we will, yeah, I'll see you in the spaces. I'll kind of pop in spaces. So thank you all. Hi, everybody. In case you missed the little message, I'm going to close out the rooms actually a little sooner than I thought, just because I think we really need to. I want to be able to hear, I want all of us to be able to hear a little bit more from Sally and the work that they're doing in Gabriela, Sacramento. So hopefully everybody had fruitful conversations. I will be closing the rooms now. Hi, everyone. Sally, where are you? Let me make sure I pin you. So go ahead, Sally, take it away. Tell us about Gab Sacramento.
Okay, can I get sharing access, please? I have a presentation.
Oh, give me a second, Sally. Where is it? Where can I? Sorry, I'm trying to find you. Wait, give me a sec. Sorry, Sally. Oh, here it is. I'm gonna make you uh that should do it for you, Sally. Thank you.
Okay, can folks see that? If I can get like a thumbs up. Yeah, cool. All right, thank you. So for my portion, I'll be talking about a little bit more about Gabriella and the work that we do. Just a heads up, I might go maybe like 5 minutes over time, but I promise you it's gonna be engaging. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. I'll reintroduce myself again if folks have may missed that. I'm Sally. I'm an organizer for Gabriella Sacramento. I was born in Delano, but raised in Stockton. I'm based out here in Sacramento. I attended school in UC Davis for Asian American Studies from 2018 to 2021. But after I ended my studies, I didn't get to finish. I found myself more immersed in community, and I live a life committed to organizing for the community. And just to get more engagement in the chat, or if you want to turn on your camera, there's so many screens in here. Feel free to write in the chat, what are some Filipino revolutionaries that come up for you in your life? What are some figures that makes you think about who is a Filipino revolutionary, since it is International Working Women's Day? And for my presentation, I will be mainly going through just like a quick situation and what's going on in the Philippines, just to lay the groundwork of how it connects to Gabriella's work. I'll go more into what we do locally as Gabriella Sacramento, and what are ways that folks can get support, how folks can support our work that we do, and how to get connected with us. Right, so you probably have already heard a little bit from Dr. Rod about who Gabriella is. Again, Gabriella is a grassroots organization that brings together Filipino women, LGBTQ folks, gender nonconforming individuals to learn and organize around issues affecting working class women today around women's health rights, violence, trafficking, migrations, and many more issues that working class Filipinas face. But something that I want to especially highlight as Gabriella is that we are a fighting organization. And what I mean by fighting is that we boldly organize, we boldly fight for the genuine liberation of the Philippines that still continue to experience U.S. imperialism, capitalism, especially upon working class Filipinos who come from the countryside or from the urban poor in the cities. And we do this by launching campaigns, hosting educational discussions, EDs, and bringing the community together to really learn about what's going on in the Philippines. And how I'll be highlighting that more currently is through what's going on right now in the Philippines, which is called the Charter Change, or also known as the Cha-Cha. And this is something I'll highlight to just, again, deepen our own understanding about what's going on in the Philippines and how it connects also to the struggles of what Filipinos are facing right now. And just to give it briefly, what exactly is the Cha-Cha, the Charter Change? I'll go briefly over it. It's referring to the process of changing the Constitution of the Philippines. And this was actually last done by the dictator Marcos Sr., who initiated martial law during this time. And this was one of the darkest points of Philippine history before he was ousted. And why the Cha-Cha is concerning, why is it concerning that the government officials are trying to change the constitution? It's more so because Marcos is welcoming more foreign control and compromising the resources of the Philippines. And this is especially alarming because it doesn't truly prioritize what Filipinos really need, where they need more basic needs, they need more jobs, they need more health. And this charter change did not have any say or input from everyday Filipinos, especially how this affects everyday working class women. Instead of thinking about bills that actually prioritize the needs of women, especially since this will increase foreign control, especially from the U.S. This also allows more military bases, where many working class Filipinos find jobs there, but are eventually put into such vulnerable conditions in the jobs that they have. There's other issues that will be even more worsened, like trafficking of women, and even children, especially the notorious Filipino pastor. His name is Apollo Kiboloy. You'll learn more about him if you follow Gabriela USA, and other issues like the labor export policy, how most of the overseas Filipino workers, more than half of them are women who find domestic jobs overseas, leading them to more family separation. And even the health sector, how many Filipinas today, it's hard to get even COVID testing, it's hard to get even maternal leave, mental health, and even food accessibility to help provide for their families. And so overall, as Gabriela, the Cha-Cha is truly not the solution for the worsening crisis in the Philippines. The Philippines has so many resources, but the people continue to remain in poverty. What we're calling for the government officials, especially for Marcos, is to actually listen to the calls of the millions of Filipino workers, from the peasants to the farmers in the countryside, who make up the large majority of Filipino society. Because if the Constitution is truly going to change, it should reflect the people's needs, not the interests of government officials who come from the ruling class in Philippine society. So I wanted to just again set the foundation for that, of how Gabriela is a fighting organization who exposes the wrongdoings of what's happening amongst our Filipinos in the motherland. And you might be wondering too, maybe some of us might not be born in the Philippines. Maybe we were just born and raised here in the United States. But regardless of whether we're born here or not, we still have a role in fighting for the genuine liberation of the Philippines. And this is where I'll go more into what we do in Gabriela, Sacramento, what we do more locally. And this was also mentioned briefly too about the anti-Asian hate violence amongst Filipinos. And this is actually a campaign that Gabriela Sacramento is taking up, the Justice for the Oriolo Ochenko campaign. and which I'll be going over briefly again. They are Filipino migrant caregivers. They're actually originally from SoCal, but where their attack happened a year ago was at the backyard of our city of Sacramento, right at the front of the Capitol. Until this day, they have not received any financial support from the Victim Services Fund or the Philippine Consulate. And why that's important, how there is so much neglect and delay delay of their court dates is because for the Philippine Consulate, they play such a large role whenever Filipinos are in or for whenever migrant Filipinos are in distress. But even till this day, they have ignored the calls for the family. And so this campaign really highlights again working class Filipinos that their issue is not an individual or isolated issues on attacks on Filipino migrants, but it's part of a bigger whole and bigger picture of what are the issues and experiences that working class Filipino migrants face. And so I hope those little brief current situations made you more curious about the work that we do as Gabriella. And I want to also invite y'all to support in other ways and continue to get connected with us. I know some of us may be coming from different areas. So maybe if there's like a Gabriella in your area, maybe that's a chapter that you might want to reach out to. Or if you're local here or close to Sacramento, these are different ways. Right now, I'm only mentioning more so like donations since we are a growing COC, a chapter organizing committee. So if you would like to continue help building our chapter organizing committee as Gabriella, we are collecting donations. This will help us especially towards programming and any future services that we may need for our events. And then another one is that we are helping fundraise Gabriella USA to attend the International Women's Alliance Assembly on June 17th through 18th in Penang, Malaysia. So yeah, if folks are willing or able to send donations, we're definitely collecting them this year, and y'all are free to Venmo. Venmo here with the memo Gab Sacktown. And feel free to also share it within your networks too. And if you want to learn more, if you want to sign up for an info session, we have our interest form here. Gabriella welcomes women, workers, migrants, LGBTQIA folks, gender non-conforming children and youth, ages 15 years and above. If they're not, then there's a Gabriella Youth that could be started of Filipino descent. And so again, if you're coming from a different area, maybe there is a chapter near you. There's many in the Bay Area, many in SoCal. I recommend going on Gabriella USA to check out what are the nearby chapters around you. Right. And so, oh, sorry.
My bad.
Just to end it off too, we talked a lot today about media, how we're representative, how Panays are representative, but it's also good to even talk about who's being shared, what's being shared in our media, and how is it being shared in our media, and especially because media is so important. There's a broad range of our community to raise our own political consciousness and critical thinking, but it's also a way to really keep our keep those accountable of how they portray media, especially on the impact on human rights, press freedom, and transparency. For media, I also want to honor the work of journalist martyrs today from Palestine to the Philippines who challenge the status quo and share the stories of what's happening to the people on the ground, because it's the people who really make that history. It's not the ruling elite. And so someone that I want to mention here, especially because it's her birthday in actually 10 days from now, is Maria Lorena Barros, who was a leader of Makibaka during the martial law movement, and she was a revolutionary herself and student activist. And I wanted to highlight her, especially for this quote. We mentioned that it's International Working Women's Day, and so I wanted to relate it back to what Maria Lorena Barros says. And so I'm gonna actually ask someone. I'm gonna ask someone I know from Gab. So Grace, can you read this quote?
Yes, I can, Self. Okay. The new Filipina is one who can stay whole days and nights with striking workers, learning from them the social realities which her bourgeois education has kept from her. More important, this means she has convinced her parents of the seriousness of her commitment to the workers' and peasants' cause, a commitment which requires all sorts of behavior previously way beyond the bounds of respectable womanhood. She is a woman who has discovered the exalting realm of responsibility, a woman fully engaged in making of history.
Thanks, Grace. So I hope this quote even reflected back in our discussions that we had earlier. How what does it really mean to be a Panay? And this is something that Maria Lorena Barros reflects as someone who is coming from her background of being a community organizer, and how for her she's committed to being with the workers, being with them on the picket line, especially how there's so many unions happening today. For many Filipinas, they come from these different types of working class backgrounds. And someone that I want to highlight lastly, my last slide is, oh, is it working? Oh, weird. So it's not working, but the last slide I actually wanted to, there's a quote that I leave off. It's actually one of my coworkers. I work at Seafood City right now, and my department is all Filipinas. And as someone who is organizing with them, trying to really walk them through what it means to like really rise up against the company and have workers' rights, one of my coworkers told me is that they as in Seafood City, violate our workers' rights. We have our human rights because they don't take care of our workers. We take care of each other. So working women are a force to be reckoned with. And for me, I wanted to go back to the question I asked y'all, who are revolutionary Filipinas that you think of? And for me, who I think of is my Filipino coworkers. So yeah, that's it for my presentation. Thanks y'all for sticking there.
Oh, thank you so much, Sally. It was a wonderful presentation. I know we're coming at time. I just want to say, as one of the parents who actually was a person trying to support their children to do their work, working and living and being alongside workers, toiling masses, indigenous people. Of course, this is a project. This presentation was from Amado Khaya Initiative, because Amado Khaya, my late son, did that work, did commit that to this struggle, and even died for it. And I think that, just to add, from an intergenerational perspective, sometimes as parents, we were doing all that work in our youth, sitting alongside, doing that struggle, and then we chose to become parents. And our work as parents even is a really important contribution as well. That we labor kind of outside of the home, we labor in the home, and among the things that we do is to try to raise children who will continue to advance the cause of liberation. And so hopefully with GAB, there's space not just for working class women, but many of whom are probably parents, so that they can also participate and find ways to ensure that even parenting and mothering, which is also so important, there's a place for mothers to be able to continue to contribute towards justice in the home, outside the home. So, wanted to leave with that. And again, I just, for those, I think everybody who joined us today signed up through had to sign up your kind of register your email. So we'll definitely follow up with resources for everybody. Laban crew, specific Amplify fellows, yay that you're here. Thank you so much. Hope you have some really great food for thought in terms of thinking about the work that y'all do in the course of the fellowship. And yeah, thank you everybody, and continue celebrating International Working Women's Day by taking more time to kind of reflect on the talk and deepen your learning. So thank you, everyone. Until the next time, we'll see you soon.
Great job, Dr. Rod and Sally. Bye, y'all.